Imagine building something from nothing, a small factory on the edge of a city, three people with a shared vision. Over decades, that factory grows into a global empire worth billions. Operations spanning five continents, hundreds of thousands of employees, brands recognized in every major market. The three founders become legends. They are photographed together at galas, their families vacation together. One calls the other a brother. Now imagine discovering that for nearly a decade, one of them was running a secret ledger, a parallel accounting system that turned the company's billions into his billions. Fictitious transactions, phantom profits, shell companies designed to drain value from the very empire they built together. When the truth finally emerged, the company's stock collapsed 90% in 2 days. Pensions vanished, investors lost everything, and the man at the center of it walked onto a beach and never came back. This is the billion-dollar betrayals of Africa. Episode 2, The Traitor's Ledger. To understand how a partnership unravels, you first have to understand what was built and who built it. The story begins in the 1960s. An immigrant arrives in South Africa with little more than manufacturing knowledge and ambition. He starts a small furniture factory in the Eastern Cape, building pieces by hand for local buyers. Over 30 years, that factory grows steadily, not explosively, but methodically. By the 1990s, it is a respected mid-sized manufacturer with a solid reputation and loyal workforce. Then two new figures enter the picture. A charismatic accountant, sharp, magnetic, beloved by everyone who met him. He joins in the late 1990s and rises rapidly. By the early 2000s, he is CEO. Colleagues call him brilliant. Journalists profile him as a visionary. He becomes one of the wealthiest and most admired business figures on the continent and a billionaire investor, a retail magnate who had built his own fortune across African and European markets. He sees the potential and places an enormous bet, over $3 billion of his personal wealth invested into the company. He trusts the CEO completely. When a journalist asks about succession, he says simply, he will be there forever. These three men transform a small Eastern Cape factory into a global retail empire, listed on two stock exchanges, operating in over 30 countries, valued at more than $20 billion. They are photographed together, they golf together, their families share holidays. The chairman later says of the CEO, he was like a brother to me. But inside the company, something is growing that none of them, except one, can see. The mechanism was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its scale. A forensic audit conducted after the collapse, commissioned by the board, spanning thousands of pages, kept from public view for years, revealed exactly how it worked. The CEO and a small circle of executives operated what investigators later described as a parallel accounting system. This was not simple embezzlement. It was structural deception, built into the company's financial reporting over nearly a decade. Here is the playbook they used. First, fictitious revenue. The company reported sales that never happened, transactions with entities that were not real customers but shell companies controlled by the CEO or his associates. Revenue appeared on the balance sheet, cash did not. Year after year, the gap widened. Second, inflated assets. Properties were valued far above their actual worth. Inventory that didn't exist was counted. Goodwill, the intangible value of acquired brands, was overstated by billions. Third, secret stakes. The CEO held hidden ownership in companies that traded with the corporation. He was both buyer and seller, negotiating deals with himself while the board believed these were arm's-length transactions with independent parties. Fourth, the inner circle. A small group of executives knew. They signed documents, they moved money, they maintained the fiction. The broader board, including the chairman who had invested billions, was kept deliberately in the dark. Between roughly 2009 and 2017, the company's true financial position was nowhere near what the published accounts showed. Auditors signed off, regulators didn't catch it, investors kept buying, the stock kept climbing. The gap between what was reported and what was real. Investigators ultimately identified over $7 billion in overstated profits and assets. On paper, this was one of Africa's greatest business success stories. In reality, it was one of the largest corporate frauds in global history. And this is where my expertise as a maritime economist comes in. Because the supply chain tells a story the financial statements never could. A global retail empire of this scale moves physical goods, furniture, home products, building materials. These products travel through ports, Durban, Cape Town, Maputo, Rotterdam, Hamburg. They move on ships. They require bills of lading, cargo manifests, customs declarations, warehouse receipts. When forensic investigators began tracing the physical movement of goods against the financial records, they found a pattern that should have been caught years earlier. Shipments documented on paper did not correspond to actual cargo. Containers listed in invoices had no matching port records. Warehouses reported as holding inventory showed discrepancies between what the books claimed and what the facilities actually contained. This is a pattern I have studied across multiple corruption cases in Africa. The financial fraud is abstract, numbers on spreadsheets, entries in ledgers, but the logistics fraud is physical. You can walk a port terminal, you can count containers, you can verify a bill of lading against customs data. When the shipping documents and the financial statements tell different stories, one of them is lying. In this case, both were, because the same people controlled what went into each. The ports became unwitting accomplices, not because anyone at the ports was involved, but because the complexity of international shipping creates exactly the kind of opacity that sophisticated fraud requires. In late 2017, the House of Cards began to shake. Auditors, new ones, brought in to review the books, started asking questions the old ones hadn't. Transactions that couldn't be verified, numbers that didn't add up, subsidiaries whose ownership structures were opaque. The CEO resigned abruptly. A brief statement cited accounting irregularities. Within 48 hours, the stock had collapsed 90%. The chairman's multi-billion-dollar investment was worth a fraction of its former value. Pension funds across South Africa, funds that held the company's stock as a core holding for retirees, lost billions overnight. Individual investors who had trusted the brand, who had seen the CEO on magazine covers and the chairman as a symbol of African business success, watched their self-peer. The total loss in market value exceeded $10 billion in less than a week. What followed was years of investigation. The forensic audit took over a year to complete. When finished, it ran to thousands of pages, detailing every mechanism, every transaction, every participant. Criminal investigations opened in multiple jurisdictions. Civil lawsuits targeted the CEO's assets. The chairman sued to recover his losses. Regulators fined the company and its former auditors. And the CEO, he spent years evading authorities while the investigation closed in. In early 2024, as arrest warrants were prepared, he died by suicide on a beach, never having faced trial, never having accounted publicly for what he had done. The chairman, reflecting later, said simply, "I was probably among the world's biggest fraud victims. He had trusted completely, and that trust had been weaponized against him." This case is not just one country's tragedy. It is a masterclass in what happens when partnership agreements, governance structures, and business controls fail. The lessons are universal. On partnership agreements, the chairman invested billions but did not retain sufficient control mechanisms. He trusted the CEO personally and professionally. But personal trust is not a substitute for structural safeguards. Any partnership agreement, whether between two founders or between a major investor and management, must include verification rights, audit access, and checks that function independently of the individuals being checked. On governance, the board approved transactions, signed off on accounts, and accepted management's representations without sufficient independent verification. The auditors, one of the world's largest firms, issued clean opinions for years on financial statements that were fundamentally fraudulent. Governance is not a compliance exercise. It is the only thing standing between a company's stakeholders and the people who control its information. On trust. Trust is essential in business. You cannot build anything meaningful without it. But trust without verification is not trust. It is vulnerability. The chairman trusted the CEO like a brother. That trust was real, and it was returned with systematic deception over nearly a decade. The question every business partner must ask is not, "Do I trust this person?" but "What would catch a problem if I were wrong?" On business controls, the fraud persisted because the same individuals controlled both the operations and the reporting on those operations. No independent verification of revenue, no physical audit of inventory against financial records, no requirement that related party transactions be disclosed to the full board. These are not sophisticated controls, they are basics, and their absence is what made the fraud possible. Every partnership is built on trust. Every business begins with people who believe in each other enough to risk their money, their time, and their reputations together. But trust, without verification, is a gift waiting to be exploited. The traitor's ledger exists in every company, not as a physical document, but as the gap between what is reported and what is real. The question is whether anyone is checking. If you are building a business in Africa or anywhere, ask yourself, who verifies what you're told? Who checks the books independently of the people who keep them? And if the answer is nobody, what would catch the problem before it catches you? I'm Christopher, Maritime Economist. This is the billion-dollar betrayals of Africa. If you found this valuable, subscribe to Africa and Beyond for more documentaries on the money, power, and opportunity shaping our continent. And tell me in the comments, would you trust your best friend with your entire business?